6 years ago, I had the opportunity to build my own home. I'd lived in Fairbanks for 4 years, and I decided I liked it enough that I wanted to stay. So I bought an acre of black spruce forest on a street where a good friend already lived. It's on the north sloping of a hillside a little ways from town. I followed game trails across the lot until I found the spot that felt right. Then I marked out a gravel pad and a driveway down to the road. When you build something yourself, you get to make all the choices. How much privacy do I want from the road? What do I really need, and what do I imagine for the future? Do I want the sunlight mostly in the morning or the evenings? I knew I wanted to build something simple so that I could fix anything that went wrong. I wanted to build it sturdy so that it would last, and I wanted to build it in a way that I could reuse the materials later if I wanted to build something bigger. The builder that I'd worked for in high school did timber framing, and the old farmhouse that I grew up in upstate New York had some timbers exposed, and so I decided I would do it that way. I took a timber framing class in Minnesota, and I ordered some handmade chisels from Idaho, and I found a design in a book for a 12 by 16 garden tool shed. So I added a big window facing south and smaller windows to the north for the view, and bought some timbers and started cutting. Spruce isn't great for timber framing because it tends to twist, but I wanted to use local materials, so I went to the lumber yard and I looked for the timbers that had started checking already, and I picked the ones that were checking straight. One of the things I like about timber framing is that you can see how it works. I think there's something beautiful in things that are well engineered, where the materials are suited to the need and the design reflects the knowledge of the builder and of centuries of experience. I think it's the same appreciation I have for someone who knows how to read a river because he's done it for years and paid attention, or someone who knows that caribou will come to a specific spot because they've come there every year before. I also wanted to build something small because I didn't want to take on too much for one summer, and also because I didn't need anything bigger. And I think we need to start living smaller. When I first started reading seriously about the damage that our use of energy was having on the planet, the thing that bothered me most was this idea that by changing the climate, we were getting rid of the idea of nature as something beyond human reach. And now the damages they're much more concrete, the wildfires and rising seas and droughts and so on. You don't have to look too hard to see that the changes that are happening are widespread and severe. So as it was October by the time I'd finished cutting all the pieces. So under cover of night, I went out the Steese Highway and got the biggest stones I could and stacked them into piers for underneath my sills. I had my friends come out to help me put up the frame. We cooked burgers and drank beers and put up my little house. And by the time I moved in, it was already full of memories for me. I've lived there for 5 years now, including the loft. It's 288 square feet. I have a little wood stove in one corner, my bookshelves, kitchen. I have 2 chest freezers along the other wall and a big desk. It's fine for having people over or watching movies with friends, and if you get about 6 people in there, it starts to feel like a party. But it hasn't felt small to me. If I open up my double doors, it's kind of like having the outside inside. You hear a fair bit these days about tiny houses, and often the appeal for people is a complete absence of material possessions, and I'm not like that at all. I actually find a lot of value in things that have meaning for me, things from the house that I grew up in or things from my parents, both of them gone now. I like having my grandma's Scrabble board. I like having my mom's copy of Salinger stories. But I am trying to buy fewer new things. We're sort of encouraged to satisfy every desire we have, or even to want things that we didn't know we wanted. But this kind of unthinking consumption is unsustainable. Almost everything we buy takes energy and resources to build. So it helps that I inherited my father's appreciation for thrift store finds. I like finding things on clearance or quality things that no one else wants. A few years after I built my cabin, I decided I wanted a table. So I looked at new tables in the stores and I looked at old tables online and figured the essential challenge of building a table was to keep the legs straight. When you make something, you're forced to really see it the same way that trying to draw something or trying to write about it makes you see. On the new tables, the legs were attached with a brace that was screwed into the skirting, and on the old tables, the skirting was mortised into the legs. And that seemed stronger to me and also more elegant, so I did it that way, even though it took more time. I think in the old days, tables probably cost more, but we probably took better care of them and they probably lasted longer. Oftentimes the old stuff works just fine. A few years ago I rode a 20-year-old snow machine all the way to Nome with no problems at all. My friend Mark and I just picked up a 30-year-old snow machine. And with Ian, we share a little riverboat with a Evinrude from 1969. And these old motors have been a good learning experience for us. I'm trying to get better at fixing things because I think it's important. I really like the idea of taking something slightly damaged and turning it into something beautiful. In French, there's a word bricoleur that's sort of like a tinkerer, but a little bit more goal-oriented, where you're trying to solve a problem with the tools and materials you have at hand. In some ways, it's like what the trappers did with log cabins and moss on the roof, or what Native Alaskans did for thousands of years before that. It's something we need to do more of. Years ago, I knew a man in Maine named Lawrence who worked as a machinist, and he still lived in the same house where he grew up. He rode an old BMW motorcycle for most of the year, and then in the winter he had an old Army Jeep, and he kept the Jeep warm in a shop that he heated all winter long with the sun and a fan and a giant pile of rocks. He kept bees and he raised cattle, and every Saturday night he slept in a lean-to that he built in the woods behind his house. It's not the life for everyone, but he seemed to have figured out how to live pretty well without consuming very much, and how to find pleasure in his own backyard. For me, feeling connected is one way to do that. One of the things I love about Alaska and about Fairbanks is that you can live a life that's really deeply connected to the land and also to your own needs. For most of the years that I've been here, I've been able to get a large portion of my food from the wild. In the last few years, I've also had a bit of a barnyard in the backyard. So this is my neighbor, and with Ian, we share a dozen chickens. They live on his property because he gets more sun, but we trade off on the feeding and watering. When we first got him, we worried a little bit that the roosters would be a nuisance to our neighbors, but when he asked the young girl who lived across the street whether she could hear them from her house, she replied with great excitement that yes, she could hear them every day. So Lawrence's shop was actually the inspiration for our chicken coop. We put 750 pounds of mine tailings behind greenhouse panels to capture the heat from the sun during the day and release it into the coop at night. It's been fun introducing other people to the chickens or sharing eggs if we have extra, or selling them, and the eggs are great. And so I had a similar pleasure 2 years ago when I raised my own pigs. These guys really made me laugh a lot. I like eating my own food because I like feeling that connection. I like knowing where the food came from and that it lived a good life. When I eat wild game, it reminds me of the people I hunted with, or the places we went, or the experiences we had together. I think it also brings me closer to reducing my footprint. The food that we eat has a huge impact on the planet. And I can't say for sure that my pork had less of an impact than other meat. I still bought feed for the pigs from the lower 48. But it certainly brought me closer to that impact, and I think that's important. I see the process of trying to live more sustainably a little bit like a puzzle, where each step brings you closer. I use very little electricity at my home, but I still live 9 miles from town, and I drive there most days. By American standards, I probably lack certain amenities. I have a single hot plate and a toaster oven and a cooler instead of a fridge. I shower outside in the summer and I bathe inside in the winter. I use an outhouse. And sometimes it feels like a drag that I don't want to light a fire or shower outside, but the simplicity also has its pluses. And I get a lot of pleasure out of the things I do have. I have a good stereo and I have a window that I can look out of from my bed. I can sit by the fire or watch the light from the flames flicker on the ceiling. And if my freezers aren't running, sometimes it's perfectly quiet in my cabin, which I like. For years, I kept using the old incandescent light bulbs. And partly I did this because I wanted the good quality light. It mattered to me. But partly I did it to sort of protest the idea that we were going to solve this problem of climate change by changing our light bulbs. But a few weeks ago, I found some LEDs on sale, and the light is actually quite good. So now I have those. I'm not a Luddite. I can't imagine living without electricity or even without 5 bars on 4G. But I think in some ways, the old ways made a lot more sense. We built things to last and we knew how to fix them. We lived at a more human scale and we made use of the things that we had. Goldstream Valley was probably an industrial mess 100 years ago, but environmental threats didn't have quite the same global reach that they do now. We can do a lot of damage now just with our dollars. To me, the argument that our own individual actions are inconsequential doesn't somehow make them right. It just means that we also need to lobby for better government policies. In his book, Atmospheric Justice, the political scientist Steve van der Heijden explores this idea that rich countries and poor countries alike will have to come up with new dreams for the future, that we can't continue to live the way we're living and the rest of the world can't aspire to live the way that we're living. I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be just in how we get around. We kind of assume that we can be wherever we want, whenever we want. But I don't think hybrids and biofuels are going to save us. I think we're going to have to slow down and travel less. Among my outdoorsy peers, I think there's this perception that consumption is okay if it's for outdoors gear, or that traveling is okay if you're going to hike or ski or something. But I question that now, and it's one of the reasons that I'm trying to find adventure closer to home. This winter, Ian and I have been exploring the woods below our street. With Google Earth, we were able to find old trails that from the time when even little drainages had names and were worked for gold. I try not to fly. I used to travel a lot and I loved it, but now I find it hard to justify knowing the damage that flying can cause. So for a few years I hosted couch surfers. I hosted people from France and Spain and Germany and China, and we would cook up some salmon or maybe make a mousse bourguignon and talk. And I learned a lot about a lot of different places doing that, and sometimes these visits would even make me see my own life in a new way. And also to realize how amazing we had it here. There's a lot of people who will travel thousands of miles just for a chance to see the Northern Lights. I've been a little bit slow to accept that living here in Alaska will mean that I see my sister on the East Coast and old friends less. But that distance isn't all a bad thing. Alaska, one of the things that makes it special is that it is so far away, that it is remote. And I think when we acknowledge that it's going to be harder to hop on a plane and leave here, that remoteness, that feeling of wildness will only increase. I think it'll be a more conscious decision to move here, and staying here, deciding to stay here, will be a reflection of a greater appreciation for it. If we have to travel less, Alaska's a pretty awesome place to be. So it might be a little bit backward, but this is kind of how I justify owning a snow machine and a boat, is that anything, within reason, anything that ties us to this place is a step in the right direction. This spring, my friend Mark and I bought some land down in Healy. It's a half-mile off the road, sort of a mix of black spruce and tussocks. And one night before we put in an offer, we had a long conversation about what we were doing, about the whole idea. Why this property and not somewhere else, or why buy land instead of traveling somewhere new each year. But we decided we wanted something that was ours and that was nearby, and we could hang out together, and Mark's kids could know one place over time as they grew up. It's a pretty special place. One time we went there, it was covered in caribou tracks. Another time we walked from here into Denali Park. I like to think that the solution to this big problem, this big global problem, can also be the reward, that in doing the things that we need to be doing, we can also make our lives richer. I think one of the biggest ways is in our commitment to community. When we invest in our own homes and in our communities, we make them nicer places to be. We get more out of them, and they have a better chance of dealing with the changes that are coming. When we get better at borrowing and figure out better ways to return favors, we're building community. For a while, Ian's brother Tristan lived on our street too, in a cabin that he built that was half the size of mine. We had the tiny house, the medium house, the big house. And we could borrow a tool or share an idea or meet without plans. And it's not something you can put a price on, but it's worth a lot. In the old days, after a carpenter had finished cutting all the timbers for a structure, the whole community came out to help tip up the bents. They had barn raisings, and I think we can still do that, even if it's more like a shed raising. I'm not saying everyone should live this way. I'm just saying these are some of the ways that I've found pleasure in living a little smaller, and that I think everybody would do well to look for their own ways. I don't think we're going to be able to buy our way out of this. I think we're going to have to change how we live. We're going to have to give some things up. But we need to keep in mind that we're giving things up already. And living small is not a radical idea. I think living big is the radical idea. So there's going to be a lot riding on decisions that we make in the next couple of years. And I think we need to consider our impact, even if we're not interested in climate change. We need to think about it when we decide where to live and what kind of a house to have, what to buy, and where to go on vacation. We need to ask if we really need something or if we can do without. We need to eat less meat and enjoy it more, travel less and stay longer. We need to think about people around the world the same way that we think about our own friends and neighbors. Some of the best things in life don't have any footprint at all. Watching the northern lights, or jumping in the lake, or growing vegetables, or showing a 2-year-old where chickens come, or where eggs come from. So our lives might need to be smaller, but they don't need to be any less rich. Thank you.